All right, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the show today. I have the pleasure of welcoming to the show first, Mr. Isaac Willour. I don't want to pronounce your last name incorrectly. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Willour, you're good.
Willour. Isaac Willour. He's an analyst at Boyer Research, America's leading pro fiduciary proxy consulting firm. He's an award winning journalist and frequent commentator on ESG and DEI, the culture war, and has worked with USA Today, National Review, the Daily Wire, American Mind, and the Wall Street Journal. Graduate of Grove City College. And I'm pleased to have you on the show today, Isaac. Welcome.
Thanks, man. It's gonna be fun.
And also, we have Oscar Gill-Lewis here today. Oscar is a recent graduate of the University of Chester, where he studied European and Latin American history and politics, with a particular focus on Spain. Further developed his interest in the topic and fluency in the language, living in both Costa Rica and Spain. Oscar is interested in European politics, especially Spanish politics, and he focuses on populism, anarchism, and nationalism, as well as regional nationalisms like those in Andalusia and Catalonia. Oscar is a local coordinator in the United Kingdom for Students for Liberty, Bastiat Scroll Writer for the year 2024, 2025, and a correspondent program manager on Speak Freely magazine editorial board. So, Oscar, welcome to the show today, sir. How you guys doing?
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to have you guys on. Let's first start with Isaac, and I wanted to talk about this article you wrote, and I'm going to bring it in here really quickly. Give me one sec. Here we go. So, how left-wing activists are trying to save corporate wokeness. I wanted to start by having you kind of talk about what this article is about and how the environmental, social governance, diversity, equity, inclusion is a big push in the United States. I'm assuming in other countries around the world. It's a big World Economic Forum, sustainable development plan. And there are definitely aspects of it popping up all over the world. So, Isaac, can you kick us off by talking about this article and what you learned and you know what the future holds for these concepts and topics?
Yeah, Andrew, thanks for having me on the show. So, I want to back up very quickly for people who aren't intimately familiar with the world of corporate finance. And I want you to imagine that the voting system in America works very differently than it does now. So every time there's a presidential election, I want you to imagine that instead of going to your polling place, you pull the lever, punch the card, fill in the circle, do whatever you do. Instead of doing that, you have to authorize a representative to go do that. And because there's millions, hundreds of millions of people in this country, an entire industry grows up around that to the point where there are large companies that are competing for the right to go in and vote by proxy on your behalf, right? I want you to imagine that system. That system sounds really strange, right? Because we're all used to the idea of just going in. We just had an election. We're used to the system working very differently. But imagine that was the case. I need you to understand that that is essentially how voting works in the corporate space. I'm referring, of course, to the practice of proxy voting. So, if you own shares in a publicly traded company, the way this works is that every season you get an invitation to what is called the annual meeting of shareholders. And you get to essentially vote your shares, which is the amount of stock that you own in the company.
Mm.
You get to use that stock to vote on a variety of things. This has been a long standing practice within corporate America. For a long time, the issues that were being raised at corporate meetings were essentially related to very basic things, basic business matters, governance, that sort of thing. In the past several decades, however, this trend has changed. And so a lot of the items on the ballots at corporations from Walmart to Amazon to Target to ExxonMobil are not, in fact, about basic governance issues, but are about social issues. They're about environmental issues. And they do maintain a certain focus on governance, but in terms of the best way to secure the ideological capture of these companies. So we mentioned environmental, social, and governance. That is where the moniker, or the acronym rather, of ESG has come from.
Okay.
So let's go back to that voting analogy, right? Why does that matter? Why do I bring that up first? Well, the reason I bring that up first is because when you vote your shares, if you own publicly traded companies, you are most of the time, most people are not voting those shares directly at a corporation's annual meeting. You can do that, but most people don't because most people own many shares in many different companies. So they outsource this to what are known as proxy advisory firms. Most of those firms are work incredibly to the left. They take their guidance very heavily from groups that are very heavily involved in climate change sorts of things, anti-fossil fuel, anti-conservative, pro-censoring of conservative viewpoints, this sort of thing. This has been the norm for years in American corporate governance, right? Only recently is this starting to change. If you're especially if you're an American, you've probably seen a lot of news, especially this election cycle in this past year, probably year or 2 years now, about the decreasing prevalence of companies essentially backing away from DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and backing away from ESG, which is the environmental, social, and governance that we talked about. I use these terms there's a technical meaning to these terms, but generally they can be all found underneath the broad umbrella of corporate wokeness, which is what we referenced in the title. So what do I mean when I say that left-wing activists are trying to save corporate wokeness? Corporate wokeness, which we use again a broad umbrella term. I know some people don't like the word woke, but it's just we're using the terms that we
Sure.
have.
Yep.
What do I mean by that? When I say that corporate wokeness is in retreat, what I mean is that many companies, most recently Walmart, there's a huge story about Walmart backing away from a lot of its pro-diversity policies yesterday, I think, in fact. Corporate wokeness is in retreat across industries at many different companies because, and this predates the Trump victory, by the way, but by a good bit, thanks to the work of a lot of people on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, people like Robbie Starbuck, but a lot of pressure from conservative and pro-fiduciary shareholder groups also. This pressure has been growing. A lot of companies are backing away from it. And it's very tempting, as I write in the piece, it's very tempting as anti-ESG, as anti-DEI people on that general side of the argument to see that as, oh, this is a de facto win. We can take a victory lap and this is a battle won. Well, I work at a proxy consultant firm that is not pro ESG. We were literally listed as an ESG skeptic firm, right? And the reason I wrote the piece was to point out that this is premature celebration to say that corporate wokeness is going away. And there are many reasons why. This is why we have the piece. You can read the piece at Daily Wire. I think it's great personally, but so the reason I wrote this piece is to say that when we were talking about the matter of changing corporate policies, especially corporate policies that have existed for years, right? They're not on many so-called woke corporate policies. We use big scare quotes, but many woke policies are not currently up for voting at corporate elections now. They've been in corporate policy for 2, 3, 4, or 5 years, or in the case of certain, especially climate-related policies, like 10 years now. What we have to do now is not just be excited that corporations are becoming less woke. We need to be very we have to have degree of prudence and discernment here, right? We have to actually take the hard work of verifying, right? There's that Reagan quote. I know maybe, like libertarians aren't the biggest fans of Reagan, but we're just going to use the quote because it's a good quote, trust but verify. This is the method, right? For people who are anti-ESG, anti-DEI, anti-wokeness, pro-fiduciary duty, and pro-business function, we have to actually trust but verify, which means we have to go in and talk to the companies, which is what we do at my firm, Boyer Research. The ticker is running underneath there with our website. That's what we do all the time. We work with institutional investors and shareholders to verify whether this move away from wokeness is truly as widespread as it would seem, because to read a lot of the press releases coming out from very pro-ESG orgs and from left-wing media sources, you would seem that the world is on fire and a bunch of conservatives and pro-fiduciary shareholders lit it on fire. That's not the case. We have to be realistic about this. This is an insider's perspective on how we can actually make corporate wokeness go away and how we can get businesses entirely out of the process of playing politics and back to their core business function.
Got it. So for people who are maybe unaware of how much how much this has come into the business world, and like you said, shareholder capitalism. I know Klaus Schwab at World Economic Forum talks about that all the time. This idea of corporate responsibility, and you need to be inclusive, and you need to be diverse, and it's all the reasons. I would say that aren't important when it comes to capital, or not capitalism, but like business efficiency,
Sure.
right? And profitability. So do these policies, from your perspective or from your experience, do they make that much more difference as far as financial gain, or these, how does it benefit these companies to implement these policies, especially what's the push to continue them if you see over time that it's affecting you negatively, profitability wise, efficiency wise? What do you think about that?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole conversation to be had here, and there's a very technical debate about what percentage of ESG funds reliably outperform funds that use ESG metrics actually outperform the market, that kind of thing. You can check
Right.
out people like Alex Edmonds if you really want the in-depth detail on that. But we'll use some really high level examples, right? So let's take an example of net zero. What is net zero? Well, it's a widespread phenomenon among not just energy companies. It's actually a lot of banks use this sort of thing. Net zero basically means commitment to net zero carbon emissions by a given year. A lot of people have 2030, a lot of people have 2050. What does that mean? Well, it means a very specific thing if you're a company like ExxonMobil, right? What does it mean for ExxonMobil to be net zero? It means the company shrinks, right? But for companies like, let's take an example, Chase Bank, or let's take another big example, probably the best known one in the world of anti ESG work, BlackRock, right? What is the actual meaningful cost to a brand like Chase or a brand like BlackRock for being anti energy? Well, they're currently blacklisted from doing business with state entities in multiple states, including West Virginia and Texas, right? So this is losing them state level clients, right? Let's take Texas for example. Texas Permanent School Fund, that's $53 billion. If you're a company and you're blacklisted from doing business with that entity, that's a huge loss.
Sure.
So when it comes to
Sure.
being anti-energy, companies are paying the price for being anti-energy in a big way. But so let's get to the question of how that works. Why keep it then? Well, the reason is that there's a lot of pressure. Back to what we said about conservatives only recently showing up to this. For the past decade, people who work in investor relations at major companies, people who are on the boards of major companies, didn't really hear from conservatives, at least not through the avenues that they're used to hearing from people, from shareholders especially. They just heard from the left. They just heard from pro ESG people. And one of the really tough factors about organizations and activists that are really pro ESG is that they'll move goalposts, right? So they'll go
Oh,
from
sure. Yeah.
like in, let's say, 2000. This is a hypothetical timeline. This isn't referring to anything real, but this sort of thing it's analogous to a real timeline. Let's say in 2005, they're like, well, we want you to limit scope 3 emissions, which is like you go to a conference, the emissions produced from you driving to the conference counts as scope 3 emissions for the company, right? It's a company
Hmm.
conference, which is really vague and difficult to quantify, but that's a different thing. We'd be here all night. In 2005, the push from ESG activists is we want you to limit scope 3 carbon emissions below this threshold. In 2015, it becomes we want you to completely eliminate scope 3 emissions. In 2025, it could be something as wild as we want you to do no business with other companies that don't limit their scope 3 carbon emissions. That's that's the level of goalpost moving that happens here. And it's not just places like ExxonMobil where the negative, where the sunk cost is really obvious, where the cost is huge. It happens at places like JP Morgan Chase. It happens at places like Truist Financial, right? These are big banks. These are some of the biggest financial service providers in the world. Why do they keep it? Because for years they've only ever heard from people who want them to do these things. Now, can they be blamed?
Yeah.
Yeah, in a sense, like, yeah, of course you can be blamed for doing non-fiduciary things. At some level, that obligation just exists. But right now, the way we keep corporate wokeness from sticking around, because that is the other thing we talked about in the piece, which we didn't really get into, which is that if you let's say you have a DEI program and your company gets rid of DEI, right? They put out a statement saying we're walking back our DEI program. What does that mean in practice? Because that's just a boilerplate public statement, right? What is it? You can say we're refocusing our DEI program. What does it mean you're refocusing? Does it mean it's going closed door? Or does it mean you just rebranded it? It's the exact same thing. You just have directives never to talk to the media about it again. That doesn't actually decrease the amount of DEI in your company. It doesn't actually decrease the leftward drift in your company and the amount of bad business decisions that can result from that. So those are the things that we look for. Those are the things that we try and be aware of. And I think that's the path forward. It's a lot more complicated than that. That's the other thing. That's the other thing I'll close out this very long-winded answer with, which is that changing corporate policies, just like changing governmental policies, to be fair, is really hard. It
Yeah.
takes nuance and it's really complicated. I'm only beginning to understand the scope of some of these things. And conservatives need to realize that creating cultural shifts, whether it's in the classroom at Columbia or Yale, or in the boardroom at ExxonMobil or JP Morgan Chase or BlackRock, these things do not change when the president changes. These things do not change when the administration changes.
100%.
These
Yep.
things are, as the late great Andrew Breitbart said, politics is downstream of culture. Changing culture is hard because changing culture involves people, right? There's that other adage, which I cannot remember who said it, but it was a lobbyist who said it to me, which is if you can't change the politics, change the people. And if you can't change the people, change the people. That's what we're up against right now. That's the move forward for us, and it's a lot. I mean, the odds have been stacked against us for years, but I think conservatives are finally standing up on this. It's a privilege to be in this movement. It's great, and it's an issue that I think more conservatives should care about. It's really, really important for all of us. If you care about financial freedom, if you care about businesses doing well, if you care about American capitalist free enterprise success, this is where the fight is. This is the
Sure.
battle.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, and I don't think your people are going to get away from it. I think um, with I kind of look at the whole ESG thing and the DEI requirements for a lot of businesses are like another type of a union. It's like another set of it's like
Sure.
a new bureaucracy with new rules and new sets that just kind of slowly eliminates freedom from the situation. And I always wrestle with that, like how far is too far for people that let's say you're an entrepreneur, you started your company by yourself with a couple people and you grow it into some big enterprise. At what point does the government come in and say, okay, well now, we get to have a say in how you
Yeah.
run your operation, so long as you're reducing externalities and you're not doing anything illegal and you're not hurting anybody. I always wrestle with that. So Oscar, let's throw it over to you. Do you have something similar like this going on in England or any the other countries you've been to, Spain, from your experience over there? Uh, you know, what can Americans learn about these similar topics from someone who isn't from the United States? How is this all going down, over in England?
Yeah, so from my perspective, the my understanding is that the UK doesn't enforce any ESG regulations. Um, it it's certainly a popular trend, as we say in the UK. When America gets a sneeze, the UK gets a cold.
Right.
So we tend to follow what American companies are doing, but we're also heavily influenced by the European Union, which
For
is
sure.
very fond of these targets. It's very fond of um, low emissions targets and no fossil fuels by
Sure.
2050 or end of emissions, but then will happily fly all of its delegates out on private jets.
To the
To
cop. Yep.
Davos.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Davos. Oh yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So we're definitely influenced by the European Union and the US in that respect. But so I think you see a lot of UK companies are interested in doing that, and I think there's probably a financial incentive for these companies to pursue ESG targets. But as far as I'm aware, it's not enforced by the government.
Oh, okay. So interesting. So there is it the same um like, because I'm so interested in how, because all of this is under this World Economic Forum, United Nations kind of umbrella now. Like there's these ideas are so consistent multinationally these days, and a lot of people for sure in the United States, and I'm assuming in other countries as well, just aren't aware of how big of a deal and how all encompassing moving to a new world, the new world order, all these things that people talk about, conspiratorial and actually realistically and logically, uh, also, you know what I mean? So I'm just interested in how different countries' governments are doing this same thing. And because it's becoming obvious, based on what both you guys just said, is that it's not just an American phenomenon. This ESG DEI thing is worldwide. And I think it's part of their sustainability plans, the climate, all that kind of stuff. Um, so so basically what you're saying then, Oscar, is that it's not too different. You're basically following what the American model is doing. kind of deal?
As much as we can, but without the growth bit.
Oh, fair enough.
Well, it's
Yeah,
interesting. So you mentioned that about the European influence on this kind of thing. I mean, there's the obvious high level parts of like it's not the New York Accord, right? It's the Paris
For
Climate Accord. But
sure.
the other thing that may be less apparent is when you look at the business case for ESG or the way that businesses defend their ESG policies. One of the reasons that we'll hear, and we've heard this quite often, is that we'll ask a company. I can. We're just going to use a very generic company. We'll ask a company, why do you have an ESG policy? And one of the answers they'll give is, if we don't have an ESG policy, European investors won't invest in us because it's just seen as synonymous with due diligence. So that's culturally really baked into the cake.
Yeah, that's so crazy to me because it just that in my when I hear that, it's I categorize it as proof that it doesn't really fully matter anymore who the president is or the prime minister is or the whatever your specific country's government, how they run their show, whether it's a more capitalist, market based, whatever, if it's a more socialist, communist, whatever, that there is it illustrates the power above every country's government that this World Economic Forum, this group of world planners, the big club as I like to call them, right? It just goes to show you that freedom is going away in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? It's not gonna be so easy to just be an entrepreneur and start a business and increase your lot in life in this world without jumping through an increasingly increasing amount of hoops that may or may not be necessary. And like you said, Oscar, like the growth part of it isn't there. And I would make the argument that that's kind of part of the deal. I don't know if they want so much growth. Uh, you know what I mean? Because that plays into this big control mechanism. And so what do you guys think about that as far as um, how much should governments allow the pressure from this entity above? Um, where do we draw the line? How far should we allow them to expect these things of our businesses and the peoples of different cultures around the world before we say, enough is enough? What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, no, it's super true. I mean, you mentioned the incentive of maybe people don't want business growth. I mean, a pretty tactile example of this is when it comes to food sustainability. So things like we use really specific examples like gestation crates for pork, right? Those boxes that they put chickens in on farms. A lot of ESG activists really don't like those things. They say that we should phase them out, which on their face, I really have no problem with phasing those things out. Like sustainability, if it goes hand in hand with business efficiency, is great, right? That's awesome. But the question is, who's setting the timeline for when these things happen, right?
Sure.
Is it the business and the good sound business analysis of when this is going to be feasible for Chipotle or whatever? I actually don't know if there are Chipotles in Europe. That was probably like a horribly America centric thing. But like you've got America sunglasses on, so like who cares? But the question is, right? Is it who's setting the timeline for these things? Is it an activist somewhere, or is it someone who has the company's best interest at heart? Because the dirty secret about some of the people
It's a great
who
question.
want to make it very, very difficult for food manufacturers to feed 8 billion people. Honestly, man, like the truth of this, some people don't want there to be 8 billion people in the world. So the notion
Sure.
of a food manufacturing chain or food production chain actually having to feed 8 billion people, it's a sunk cost. Well, okay, so like, it's very Malthusian in its
Oh yeah.
implications. It's really twisted.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was going with that. Like I mean, obviously every country's going to do it differently because, there's it's not going to be it's definitely easier said than done, but at some point I feel like the day's going to come where nobody's going to even want to make the attempt to start businesses anymore. Everyone's going to need to look for a job from the government and from whatever businesses the government allows to operate, which is basically government control the means of production. And now, how close to communism and socialism are we? So, you know what I mean? Oscar, what do you think? I wanted to ask you this question. Based on your experience, like when compared to like the populism, I know this is kind of a shift change here. I'm kind of like changing
sure.
directions, but um, the populist movement that is MAGA in the United States and is the Trump phenomenon. I know you have a lot of experience with populism, populist movements, anarchism, and these concepts from Spanish and English perspective. So, how would you compare? And I know this is kind of a big question, but like, how would you compare and contrast the growth of a populist movement in European countries from your experience versus how it happened with the MAGA Trump movement here in the states?
Sure. So, from my perspective, a lot of the populist movements in Europe sort of stem from, um, well, they have a different government structures, right? So that they some of them have parliaments. They don't have the same um, structure as the US with the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial
Sure.
branch, um, and so and also they have different voting structures. So um, we in the UK we have first past the post, but lots of people would like us to have proportional representation. And so there are countries like the Netherlands and in Spain where uh, populist parties have really taken a stronghold in definitely in some provinces of these countries, but also in the main parliament and across the country, but spotted around. And you can also see this in East Germany, um, or not the country, but the part of
Sure.
yeah. Um, and a lot of this reaction seems to come from immigration issues that Europe is facing at the minute, whereas the US has, from my perspective at least, has its own immigration issues, but um, they don't seem like a primary impact on the increase of the populist movement in the US. So Trump is, I mean, one of the key factors of populism is being anti-establishmentarian, being not the establishment, but going and also going against the establishment. So I think Trump is a very key figure. He's not a career politician like Joe Biden, for example. Think of Joe Biden what you like, but he spent his life in the Senate,
Hmm.
in as the vice president, as the president. And then a lot of people stay on and then like Obama, and then they give their blessing to the next Democrat candidate. But Trump is not like that. He spent his whole life in business, and then all of a sudden he uh, wins primary and then wins the election. And I think he gained a lot of support from people, especially in rural areas, especially rural Pennsylvania, which I understand to be a swing state. That
Hmm.
they not that they identified with a billionaire, but they identified with somebody um who was not part of the club and who went
Hundred
in
percent.
and said, I'm going to stick it to you guys. Whatever you think of it, I'm going to stick it to you. And to people like Kamala who code switches, but she's not she doesn't understand the mindsets of people who live in rural communities. I mean,
Sure.
I feel like she can't even um, communicate well with her donors.
Yeah. Oh no, she can't communicate well in general. So, no, I know what you mean there. But so in the UK and in Spain then, or in Costa Rica, all the
Yeah.
places that you have been, is there opposition to these populist movements or these ideas of people, preaching anarchism or preaching reduced government involvement in things? Is there the same pushback over there than there is in the States? Like, what with here comes that word woke again, right? The woke left in the States, where I mean, you can't even have conversations with people in public anymore without getting violent, erratic um, rebuttals to just suggesting ideas that don't go along with the left wing orthodoxy in the States. So, is that a similar phenomena that's happening over there as well?
Of seeing the of not being able to have conversations because people are so erratic.
Right, like do those populist movements or those people that are preaching anarchism or damn the man, F the system, like anti-authority, punk rock stuff, ideas, is that the same over there as far as the pushback? Is the pushback level the same that it is in the United States? Because
Well,
there's
I mean, it's interesting in the UK. I mean, a lot of our populist movements tend to be right wing, but they don't have to be. We also have the populist left wing, although that ended with Jeremy Corbyn, who was a Marxist.
Hmm.
And there are some people that would call Keir Starmer a Pabloite, and which is a rather obscure term for a Trotskyist. Um, so,
Yeah.
but I don't think Keir Starmer is particularly populist, but there have been very successful recent populist examples in the UK. So, um, for your listeners who may not be aware, Nigel Farage, who is a um, very influential populist leader and politician. He's never been prime minister or got near any seat of power. I mean, he's been a member of parliament for many years on and off, but I would say that Nigel Farage has had a huge impact on British politics just from how he influences the public, how he influences the national conversation. And I think he was the biggest reason why we had Brexit in the UK.
Mm.
Because David Cameron, who was the prime minister at the time, was a fan of the EU. That's fine. That's David Cameron's opinion. And to be fair, in the UK, it was a very close split in the vote. Nigel Farage had very strong feelings about it, and he's a very good communicator. He's a man of the people. I mean, he likes to wear tweed. He goes out, but he's very good at communicating to people on their level.
Hmm.
And he managed to get Brexit done, as he would say, um, and then he's gone on to try and influence the conversation around immigration and these other issues. And he was a big reason why I think anyway that the Conservative Party in 2019 with Boris Johnson broke what we call the Red Wall. So the Red Wall is if you look at the map of constituencies on the UK. Uh, Red is the symbol for the Labour Party or the left wing party in the UK, and blue is the Conservative Party. And so there's a big red wall in the north,
Hmm.
uh, which is tends to be. Um, I mean, the Labour Party has sort of bourgeois leftist professionals, and also sort of more not rural but lower class workers, the proletariat people who work on trains, who work on buses, who clean the streets, things like that, and or people who work in mines who have a strong distaste for Margaret Thatcher and the Conservative Party. And in 2019, the Conservative Party broke the red wall, and that was partly due to Nigel Farage and also Boris Johnson, who heavily used populist tactics and
Interesting.
rhetoric.
Okay.
Oscar, I'm kind of
So,
curious about something.
Yeah, go for it.
So the when you mentioned immigration, so it kind of got me thinking about. So at least in the American kind of consciousness, the concern about mass immigration kind of falls into two buckets, right? There's the economic bucket of like they just think like the traditional thing is like immigrants are going to take our jobs, right?
Mhm.
Illegal immigrants are going to take our jobs. There's the economic bucket, and then there's the public safety bucket, right? Of like more crime, more right. And this is the thing that Georgia Maloney the other day was getting like, yelled at for mentioning that incidence of sexual violence is way higher among migrants than it is among others. And people were raking her over the coals for it. I mean, Jacobin was going after her, right? When it comes to that breakdown of people who are anti-mass immigration, mass illegal immigration, especially for economic reasons versus public safety reasons, I'm aware those two are like fairly connected, but still. When it comes to sentiment, like opposition to mass migration, do you find that in the UK and in Europe, it generally which one of those two rationales is generally stronger?
I think it would probably err on the side of public safety, especially in more recent times. I mean, there's definitely the economic aspect, but I would say that the stronger sentiment is the public safety. So I don't know if you heard we had some race riots in the summer.
Yep.
Yay!
hmm.
Um,
Jeez.
um,
We've never
basically,
had any of those in America.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
we're
Uh,
catching up. So. So at this Taylor Swift concert in Southport, which is in the north of England, um, a a child of a to get this right, otherwise the UK government may sue me. Um, a child of a Rwandan immigrant parents stabbed 3 girls at a Taylor Swift concert. And
Oh,
so
jeez.
you may be familiar, there's this famous tweet that the gov.uk put out, which was, "Think before you tweet, it may be illegal."
Oh boy. See, that's a perfect example of my fear. Like, how far are we going to push this on the world stage? Not just in the UK, not just in the States. Like, it's just crazy. And I wanted to ask you, Oscar, about this article. So let me bring this in. I'm going to share the screen real quick. This article that you wrote. Let me find it here. Oh no, that's not it. Give me one sec. Here we go.
As you scroll into that, I think that's super enlightening because like yeah, you're right. I kind of
Yeah.
forgotten about that Taylor Swift thing. Those kids were like 11 years old.
They were very young. They were young teenagers, and
Yeah.
you might also remember the in Germany when they let in about 1 million
Mhm.
migrants. I think it was around Christmas, and they were encircling women,
Yeah.
and because they were wearing skirts, and I think um, uh, it led to an increase in rape
Yeah.
Sure.
and sexual assault, and I
Yeah, well,
think
they used
that's
to
a big
call
fear.
Malmo, Sweden, the rape capital of the world after there was a bunch of mass migration in there. That was a couple years ago at this point, but
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I think Germany has the same issue. France doesn't collect race statistics, which is quite interesting. So if you want to know how many Muslims have committed crimes, or how many French people or white people or blue people have committed crimes, we don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, that
By
Jeez.
by the way, that like really quickly, and then we'll get to the
Yeah,
article. I swear, that perpetuates racism. By the way, if we're
for
going to
sure.
talk about
For
the
sure.
if you have no data to go off of, people are just going to assume things,
Hmm.
and those assumptions are going to fall along preconceived lines. That's how you engender and increase the perniciousness of racial stereotypes. And the anyway,
I've
on
always
onto the
100%.
article.
believed.
And I think the Cato Institute is doing some work on immigration
Yep.
and they work with a lot of data that shows that actually migrants don't commit more crimes than natives, and actually suggests that natives commit more crimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for is on the immigration issue, I feel like it's a much more in your face, in your day to day life, visible problem in Europe, because I always make the argument that European countries are the size of American states. I mean, you're
Yep.
talking much, vastly more land area in America that can kind of absorb a lot of immigration. Uh, I guess in a, for lack of a better word, a better way, I suppose, than Europe could. And that makes me, this whole conversation, to your point too, Isaac, about how the perpetuating of these narratives, and it's like we're gonna open the floodgates and make every nation on the in the world multicultural, which is inherently gonna have bring cultural conflicts because of different belief systems, different worldviews, different social norms, and cultural mores, all melting potted together into one big thing. And then it makes me think about Klaus Schwab at World Economic Forum saying, uh, the world is going through four transformations, and one of them is a more violent, more confrontational world. And it's like he's saying that we're doing this, and we're doing it by design. We want you focusing on racism and racial, uh, you know, um, conflict. We want
Yeah.
you focusing on the climate change, whether or not we're throwing chemtrails in the air and seeding clouds and creating hurricanes. And it's like they have uh, a method of perpetuation, and the answer, they already have the solution. It's like thesis, antithesis, synthesis,
Yeah.
right?
I think
Straight out
that's
of
super true.
Hegelian dialectic is they're going to show you the problem. They're going to talk about the problem. They're going to drill it in your head. But don't worry, America. Don't worry, UK or anywhere else in the world. We have the solution for you. We already thought about it. Our very intelligent, illuminated, enlightened minds here at World Economic Forum and the United Nations have thought about this, so you don't have to. You just go back to bed and don't worry about what your government's doing. And then slowly but surely over time, these policies are implemented. Slowly, one freedom's taken away, another freedom's taken away, and something you wrote in this article, um, Oscar, which let me share the screen right now. I really liked. Let me show this real quick. Here we go. In opposition, conservatives must stand up against the nanny state, and I love that title. But you say something in here. Let me scroll down. that I really like right here. Starting with governments right here. Governments seem comfortable confiscating our freedoms, one morsel at a time, slowly chipping away at our liberties and cultural norms, but without any of the flashy aggression of actual authoritarianism. I love that. That's a bar. That way, we stiff upper lipped Brits don't register it as a loss of freedoms, but a mere inconvenience. And I think a lot of people think that way. Oh, it's not that big of a problem. Why are you worried about that? Don't worry about that. This is for the greater good. This is for the betterment of everybody. Blah, 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 right? Or perhaps even our civic duty to support the government in its latest noble quest to protect the NHS from those who use it and pay for it. So I just like how you're talking about a smoking ban here, but I love the sentiment of your words there. So can you talk about this article, Oscar, a little bit, and what you found and what your findings were? And
Yeah, of course. So I wrote the article against a variety of smoking bans in the UK, and one of the most prominent ones, which is quite useful to talk about, is the generational smoking ban. And so what that means is that anyone born after 2008 or 2009 will no longer be able to buy cigarettes. So let's say that I'm born in 2007, I can buy cigarettes for the rest of my life. But Isaac, who's born in 2008,
Sure.
you will no longer be able to buy cigarettes. We can go to the supermarket together and it will be illegal for you to buy cigarettes, but not for me.
I don't
mean,
even
So
smoke, and that makes me want to smoke.
so it will
this
phase
is my
out
point.
smokers or illegal smokers or
It's
legal
gen-
smoking.
I feel like these narratives, you guys, are genius. It's like a perfectly crafted, self-fulfilling prophecy. You are the enemy. You are wrong because of X, variable X, and we expect you, and you should be doing, whatever variable Y in order to, at what point? Like you said, like we have to put our foot down against the nanny state. Where do you draw the line, and can you even draw the line? Is it already too far out of a small groups maybe control some populist movement? Is it something that it's already just time has evolved to this level of national, I always think of the Rockefeller quote, the supranational sovereignty of world bankers and an intellectual elite is surely preferable to the national auto-determination practiced in past centuries. It's like they're flat out telling you what their plan is. What do you guys both think about that?
Yeah, no, it's super true. I mean, there's that whole question. The question gets brought up every election cycle of like whoever the president elect is. They're like, who in the government are you going to put in charge of the economy? Who's
Sure.
going to run the economy? The correct answer to that is you don't want. I don't want anyone in I don't want anyone in the federal government running the economy, because there's not because they're bad people. Some of them definitely are, but like
Sure.
it's
Sure.
it's a situation of
No
that's
doubt.
not the federal government's job to run the economy, whatever that exactly
That's
means,
my
and no one
point.
ever explains what they mean. But yeah, I don't want anyone in the federal government running the economy. There's nothing that I trust as an organ of the federal government to micromanage the economy. And then I just like angrily like throw a Friedrich Hayek book across the room, and that's just the end of that. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's just going back to what Oscar said too about the age difference thing with the smoking ban. Like, it's such an arbitrarily created thing that to intellectual people that aren't easily um, hoodwinked, right, um, are going to look at that and say, is there a hidden agenda here? What's the hidden agenda? What's the motivation? Is somebody making money off of the situation? Is someone trying to hurt, cigarette manufacturing industry? Like in the States, we have that big Truth anti-smoking campaign. I mean, that's a very well-funded don't smoke propaganda campaign. Somebody is paying for that for
yeah.
a very specific reason.
Yeah, I was just reading
So
about this the other day but it's kind of the opposite when it comes to the federal. So Oscar, back in America, we had this awful thing called the federal food pyramid. I just wanted to say it to make
yeah,
sure
go
to
ahead.
remind you that we're here and you're there. Um,
I,
but we
I'm
had this thing called
actually,
the.
yeah. Sorry, go on.
Oh, are you in America? Oh, you should move
I'm in
here, my
DC right
man.
now.
My man. Okay, you should like not go back
Oh,
to Europe and
oh,
stay
I didn't
here.
know that. I thought you were in the UK. Oh, okay, okay.
please immigrate. We need people like you here.
I'm only here for a
Yes.
short time.
Yes.
Oh, it's sad. But anyway, so this federal food pyramid business, right? It's like the list of nutrients, and it goes up, and it's like
Yeah.
a pyramid. It was on everyone's cereal boxes like a decade ago. And the reason
Sure.
it's not on there anymore is because it sucked. It made everyone super fat because it put the amount of recommended carbohydrates intake really, really high. Who did
Sure.
that? Cereal manufacturers. The
Mm,
cereal lobby put, I think it was like a three, I think it went from like 3 grams to 11 grams, like some ridiculously high intake. But to your point, Andrew, it is paid for. These things are all paid for, and even if they're good things, like yeah, I do kind of want less people smoking, but I'm not about to be like, yeah, let's put in a cutoff for 2008. Let's see. Okay, so that
right.
means you're like 16 years old. Okay, I don't really feel like that's a great way to go about it. Maybe I think that's something culturally too that Americans just really react really viscerally to. Is back when I want to get your thoughts on this actually, Oscar, because I'm interested when it comes to the COVID stuff because you mentioned COVID in the piece.
Mhm.
The default American response to COVID restrictions was just screw you, I'm not doing it. End of story. And I was told by friends in Europe, and this may not jive with your experience, so I'm interested, that just wasn't the approach in Europe. Everyone was kind of a lot more chill about it. What do you think?
Yeah, so the people were a lot more chill about it. I suppose part of my experience is warped from what I saw on social media. There were some people, especially in gyms, because we closed down gyms because that makes 100% sense.
Yeah,
If you want healthy people,
yeah. You
you
might
close
get
down the
sick,
gym.
get sicker. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
Um, but it's perfectly fine to have big protests because we know that COVID doesn't transmit in protest or doesn't transmit in large groups of police. Um, so uh, I think we had there was one example of two people who went on a hike who were in the same, I hate using this word, but bubble, and the police tracked them down and then told them that they had to separate or be 5 meters apart or um, so we definitely had the same sort of um, don't do this, don't do that. But people were much more accepting of it, and especially because we sort of have one health system, the National Health Service, the NHS, which is fully socialised. Um, people are. It's very lionized and deified in the UK. So, especially at the start, we had people going out every Tuesday at 7 or 8 p.m. clapping pots and pans as a celebrating the workers in the NHS. And I'm all for celebrating the workers in the NHS, but the idea of that we the citizens need to protect the NHS, which is supposed to protect us, which we're supposed to protect it. It sort
So
of
much circular logic. It's so crazy to me.
also, like, how does that help the NHS? Like, you just went outside and like create a public disturbance, and this is
yeah.
supposedly going to help a governmental organization be better at its job.
I think it was small level motivation of for nurses being like, "We're with you during this difficult time," and I think I'm not sure if the logic
Thoughts and
holds
prayers.
at the start that the 2 weeks that you know as long as nobody goes that we can kill the curve or we can get prepared with these 2 weeks. But then, like I said in the piece, morsel by morsel, those 2 weeks were the longest 2 weeks of my life.
Yeah. Oh man, I have a buddy who's a
Ugh.
cop. Next time he tells me like his job is really sucky, I'm just gonna like go to his front yard, bang a bunch of pots and pans together as motivation, and then he's gonna tell me to leave the premises.
You might be a much better cop.
Oh, then a British one, yeah, because he's American. Sorry,
It's
Oh
it
fine.
was
man.
gonna it was gonna happen at some point. No, British cops are legit though. Like no shade on British cops, they're great.
Well, I mean, there was a case during the COVID period where this police officer um, used his position of authority to rape and kill a woman, which we had a vigil for, and then um, police got upset that the vigil was during COVID. So, um,
Man, you just don't know
See
which
this
part of that is supposed to win out in the compassion Olympics.
yeah, it's tough. It's tough.
remind all this remind. It's like, oh man, it's this is why I love the idea of punk rock, anti-authoritarianism, and anarchy just in general, because people think it's chaos and it's not. It's actually order. And granted, maybe the technological world has advanced to a point to where there's never going to be some revolution where everyone says, okay, we're done with government. Like, because I feel like people just organically organize themselves
Yeah, I mean, I would qualify
poorly
that, like
over
what
time, you
Isaac
know?
said, like about the Hayek bucket. It's spontaneous order. You can have order with governments, and also you can have a
Sure,
minimal government, but it's
sure,
spontaneous order of the people, not order by the government, ordering top-down order, let's
correct.
say.
Yeah, it's bottom up order. Well, yeah, this is the whole thing. Even in America, with some of the stuff that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says about like fluoride in the water, right? Like going back to your point about order and like the best way to solve that. Fluoride in the water, just for an example, it's not a nationalized thing. That's a municipality by municipality situation. I kind of want it to stay that way. I want a lot of things to be managed locally. I don't think the federal
Sure.
government really gets an opinion on that beyond like fluoride is sometimes okay, which is true, right? I want these things to be managed by the people who are closest who can, because the whole point of like high things like the knowledge problem is that like the federal government does not possess the knowledge to craft effective policy for everything, especially not economic things like prices, right?
Totally
That
agree.
knowledge comes
Yep.
from that knowledge is disseminated throughout society to smaller actors, which is so the responsibility of governance should be too.
100%. And like you said, that sometimes fluoride is good, that the federal government can't sit in Washington, D.C. and go, oh, well, for this
In
city in
Kansas,
Wyoming, it's or in Kansas or wherever, this level is good, but this level is not, and we should start it here or cut
totally,
it off here, or why don't we just quarantine the entire country?
we would never do
Yeah.
that.
So fascinating to me hearing how, yeah,
We would.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's just so fascinating to me to hear these stories of how the COVID thing was, you know, I call it the COVID op because I think it was a military industrial complex operation. And I think that um, watching how, like, I always think of Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand telling people, we're going to lock you down in your homes. You have to listen to us. Don't listen to any misinformation or disinformation. We will be your, quote, single source of truth, unquote, directly out of George Orwell's book, right? So it's just very interesting to me to see how different world leaders around the world handle these ESG guidelines, policies, how they handled the COVID crisis, and how much these bureaucratic groups are slowly encroaching into everybody's day to day life. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah, well,
I mean,
the
it's really
point that
interesting
Oscar
that you
makes. Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, I mean, it's really interesting that you brought up the Jacinda Ardern. I mean, I'm more skeptical of the idea that it's a huge global co-op, but that Jacinda Ardern was actually the origin of the smoking ban, and it was either Jacinda Ardern and also the Labour Party in Australia in um, the early 2000s. Um, I think it's 2008. Um, and I think it's more of a tendency where these bureaucrats and these politicians have these tendencies, and then they see frameworks that they can copy
Hmm.
rather than
Sure.
colluding. But it's got so bad in Australia that that tobacco gangs are going around firebombing convenience stores to sell their tobacco and then pay them a tax for it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is
It's
let's
like
let's think about
mafia.
that very. Let's yeah. No, but really though, when you mentioned mafia, like that's what human civilization was like everywhere all the
Hmm.
time until like 300 years ago when we all decided that like when the enlightenment happened and all these good things started happening and economic productivity started going up, right? You mentioned the thing about the op, which we're not going to opine about whether COVID was an op or not. I don't
Right.
think it was, but it is what it is, right?
Yeah.
What it was, decidedly outside, like regardless of what we think about that, the thing we can probably all agree on is that it provided a perfect opportunity for a lot of people who think the government should control a lot of things it profoundly shouldn't.
Sure.
That was a perfect platform for a bunch of people who are very into the idea of a nanny state. I mean, that's the teleology of the nanny state. It's just a bunch
Yeah.
of people who are afraid that somewhere someone might do something without government authorization and control.
How
That's
dare
which
you?
we it's really easy to look at that and think, "Oh, we would never do that." But like at the end of the day, there's a little authoritarian in everybody. And the whole point of being a conservative and being a libertarian is realizing that that is a fundamentally dark part of human nature that we have to fight against. And I think
Sure.
that has to inform our politics a ton, which is why I think Oscar's piece is really good about that.
Yeah. I think having logical, rational voices non-emotionally explain advanced, complex uh, concepts is required and necessary in this world of, I call it clown world a lot of the time, and based on exactly what we were talking about here today about these arbitrarily imposed regulations on smoking or on, you know, separating 6 feet from each other. Like, I work at a bar, and we literally during COVID, this is the most non-logical thing I've ever seen, and it just like every time I looked at these things, I was just like, what is happening to rational thought in this world? We literally had this guy build these plastic separators on this like wooden thing that you could like it hooked onto the back of the bar, and you could slide it down depending on how many groups. So you had a two people here, you could bring the separator things to the two people. If they had a third person, you slid it down. They sat at the bar next to them. Now you have like a little three top right there in this little section at the bar.
I
And I'm
love it.
like, what is this solving? Like, somebody please explain to me how this is preventing the spread of an airborne virus. How are we all mass formation psychosis? How is this
Yeah.
happening right now? And it's happening not only in the States, it's happening around the world. So what do you guys think about that? Is that can that be laid at the feet of the media? Is that the successes of the media networks and telling everybody what to think around the world?
Maybe. I mean, I remember a moment during probably early COVID, probably March of 2020. I walk into a store and I'm at the one end cap, and the other end cap's like 20 feet away. And there's this woman who comes into the aisle on the other side in violation of the point of the stickers on the floor telling us
Sure.
which way to walk. So I reported her to the Ministry of Truth immediately. That's a joke. Anyway, but like she's like getting her stuff, and we're like 18 feet apart. And then she turns and she looks at me, and she gets this look of like horror and concern, like she's just killed my puppy in front of me. She's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and she leaves. We don't. We can be in the same store at the same time. Like, I'm not spitting 18 feet across this aisle to hit you with the COVID. That's not a thing that happened. It was just a I don't know. I graduated high school in 2020, so like this was just a very formative thing for me and realizing how quickly our survival instinct, which we'd all like to think are buried very deep because we all have like iPhones and trust funds and like cool stuff like that. The minute an existential threat pops up, we revert back to some very tribalistic, very medieval ways of
Sure.
thinking. And these things are very under this. They're a scratch away from becoming the driving factor of our consciousness. And I think so. I think some of it is the media. I'm sure you're right about that, but I think some of it is like we as people inherently, fundamentally, what we are as people hasn't changed. That bit is transcendent. That's just
Sure.
one bad moment, one bad collective existential threat away from emerging again. I don't know, Oscar. What do you think?
I mean, did you guys have a run on toilet roll
I don't know
during
what
the
that is.
pandemic?
I
Oh,
didn't.
never mind. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, yes, we did. It was fun. People were throwing
Okay.
punches over toilet paper. It's great.
Oh, yeah. I see what you're saying. Yep.
Yeah, we had the same thing with flour as well because everybody got into bread making, so you couldn't buy flour at all. It was
Yeah, in
flour and
America,
toilet
we got
paper.
into sourdough starter. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
we did that as well. But
Yeah. It,
I mean, part of it is that I mean, a lot of people will note that the news and the media tend to talk about negative things. Nobody goes in front of a high school and says, "Look, there wasn't a school shooting here,"
right.
because it's their rare events and um, what's the saying? I think blood cells or um, I mean, people like I think it's a like what Isaac said. It's deep within us that we have a negative bias that we're on the alert for threats, and
Sure.
people
Flight or flight.
want
Yeah.
fight. Yeah, exactly. And people want to see that on the news, no matter how weird it might look.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
so
entertainment. I don't think it's news. I think it's entertainment, and I think that it exists to make money. And if the going back to shareholders and stockholders, if the product isn't performing, then and it still stays on the air, um, there's how long are you going to let something be in the red before you say, okay, we got to go in another direction? And I think that's about to happen in the States with this new Trump election. Is that I just talked to my buddy Sam Winchester from According to Sam podcast on my last show, and we were talking. we were talking about how the media is about to get shaken up. Mika Brzezinski and Morning Joe Scarborough going down to Mar-a-Lago to, Sam, how Sam put it is they had to go kiss the ring. They had to go kiss the ring. They had to, and they normalized and legitimized this Hitler character, the most racist, evil, misogynistic person to ever live that needs to die and never come back, right? And and now all these left-leaning people are pissed off because, why would you go sit with Trump? And that's the lunacy of some of these policies, like we're saying. Like, at what point does rational thought begin and absolute emotional, primal, tribalistic mind, fight or flight takeover, just completely blind people from knowledge and from non-violent, rational conversations, and
Totally.
it's being helped along by these policies. You know what I mean?
I mean,
Totally. I
it's
mean,
really
it's a contagion thing. I mean, going back to what Oscar just described, that run on toilet paper, right? Like, I know a ton of people who think that January 6th was just like the like on
Oh God,
par with dropping the atomic bomb on Japan. Okay, like full
yeah.
disclosure, January 6th wasn't good. Okay, like whatever. But if you think that that is something unique in human history, even in American history,
Oh, no
4 months before then, as Oscar just described, there's some suburban like mom of four starts throwing punches over toilet paper.
Sure.
These things are not
Nuts.
new. These things are not that far away from anybody. And sorry, Oscar, you were about to say.
no. I mean that's a really good point, and exactly that people. I mean, I don't want to. We think that we're way more rational than we really are. It's not just
Oh,
the
so
left
true.
that are irrational. There are plenty of people on the right. There are plenty of libertarians who are irrational. But it's
Totally.
important that we prize rationality and objectivity as much as we can. And I also think that that leads into the point of not making silly comparisons. I mean, like Isaac said about Contagion, once somebody makes the Hitler comparison to Trump, a lot more people will start doing it, and I don't think
Yep.
that's helpful to the conversation.
Totally agree. Yep.
Yeah, don't call people Hitler. Like
And don't.
we could probably just have that across the board, right? There are very few things in your life that are particularly reminiscent of Adolf Hitler, and probably a kind of fairly by on at least on the policy side boilerplate Republican presidential candidate is not up there.
And the worst bit is that it desensitize. I probably said that wrong. People to the insult of being called Hitler.
Hmm.
Sure.
People, young kids are growing up nowadays hearing, "Oh, the president's Hitler." Okay, so Hitler's not that bad.
Yeah, and then when you
Right.
read about the
Right.
real Hitler, there's like,
Totally.
oh well, he can't have been that bad. I hear that word all the time. It's like, no,
Y-
no, 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 no. This
Right.
was you're witnessing linguistic metamorphosis, young child.
Language shapes
Yeah.
reality. Exactly. The how you talk about things. I always think about. I read this thing back in the day about the Hutu and the no. What are
The
the
Houthi.
tribes?
Yeah.
The
Huthi
Houthis.
and the
Sorry, no, the Hutu and the Tutsis. Yeah,
Hutu and the
Rwanda.
Tutsis
Oh,
and Rwanda. And I read this thing and this guy that was describing how the fight and the revolution and all the violence began was he concluded that it was the language that they used when they described each other was so evil, just disgustingly like cutthroat, like the worst thing things you can say to people. And I was a sociology major and I studied a lot of social movements um, throughout many countries over the years, and it's a common thread where complete rationality and cooperation and pragmatism just go out the window, and you start describing each other as dogs or pigs or whatever it is, and now you're right back to slavery and genocide. And it's like how we talk to each other absolutely matters and can dictate the outcomes of things. You know what I
I
mean?
think that's really interesting, like what you said before, Isaac, about the immigration, that there are two main concerns, the public safety and the economic. And I think they go to two key concerns of people nowadays. Public safety, I could get stabbed going to the club or going to
Yeah.
the bar or going out shopping. And economic, I could lose my job and no longer feed my kids.
Yeah.
Sure.
No, that's totally true. Yeah,
And
both
then
of
you
those
start
things
getting
are.
emotional.
Yeah, because when something
Absolutely.
you love is under threat, like all rationality goes out the way. It's not even close. Yeah.
Yeah. It makes
Yeah,
me
and going back to
wonder.
the right, I mean, like, yeah, this contagion exists on the right too. Oh my goodness, we could talk
Sure,
about that for an hour.
100%.
The amount of crazy nonsense that some people who call themselves kind of broadly the right believe in, it's the exact same thing. Because if you believe in, well, it's interesting, right? I'm trying to remember who. There's a quote about this, about in the heart of every true fanatic lies a secret fear of denial, right? If you
Mm,
believe in something to the point where you're willing to discard rationality to think about it, and I can't think of it might have been Rene Girard, I don't know, but anyway, if you are willing to believe in something so strongly that you're willing to eschew rational belief to get there, that kind of implies that you're secretly very afraid that that might not in fact be true. And
mm,
so, if the cost of
mm-hmm.
preserving that belief, therefore not having to look like an idiot in front of everybody, is having to be not rational, okay,
It's rooted
that's
in
not a huge
ego.
cost. Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
I think people. I think a lot of people don't realize how much of their worldview, uh, especially when they've never been exposed to certain ideas and certain realities, um, they don't realize it at the time, but their reaction to it is from a place of ego. It's not from a place of the desire to understand. It's like I feel threatened. Goes right back to fight or flight. Like, oh,
Hmm.
you're disagreeing with me, but so now I need to fight about it. I can't
Hmm.
just have a calm, rational conversation. And
Yeah,
that's
because words are
that's
violence. Your words are
yeah,
violence to me, and therefore I'm justified in actually hitting you with a brick because your
right.
words are violence and this brick is violence. And if we're all just calling everything everyone else does is violence, then guess we're just all going to be violent to each other.
Yeah, and that's my I think that's my biggest fear with all of this stuff is that in every one of these instances the word that keeps popping in my head that's kind of all encompassing is hypocrites. Everyone's a hypocrite. It's a bunch of just hypocrisy. You have the far lefties that want to police everything you say, and you can't do certain things. And if you do, here comes violence, mudslinging, doxing, real evil means shit. You know what I mean? And then on the far right, like the very Christian conservatives, they don't want to hear anybody threaten their belief system and
Yeah.
their orthodoxy. So I mean, and their behavior, let's be honest, isn't very principled as much as principled as they would like to think that they are majority of the time. So I think it's an inherent, ego and hypocrisy when with regard to the human mind and human nature and human folly and fallibility. Can a perfect system ever really emerge from we imperfect creatures? What do you guys
Yeah,
think?
no, I mean that's super true, and it leads you into some really weird historical parallels, right? Like if you're, let's go back to that whole thing about violence, right? If you subscribe to the Antifa kind of philosophy, right, and you're like, well, it's okay to punch a Nazi, right? It's okay to punch,
Right.
it's okay to punch people if they're Nazis. Well, if you subscribe to that kind of far left viewpoint, but then you're okay with like pro-Palestinian protesters praising Hamas and breaking
Hundred
windows, I'm like,
percent.
you've
Hundred
just fit
percent.
into, like, if you're willing to break windows because your hatred of the Jewish people, I got a real rude awakening as to exactly what historical parallel you're bringing up.
For sure.
Because ideology blinds people. It blinds people to rationality, and it makes them sacrifice all sorts of things. Because at the end of the day, people don't always want to be rational. They want to be right, and more than that, they want to believe that other people are wrong. And the same thing goes for virtuous and non-virtuous as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. It's definitely a brave new world out there. What do you guys foresee in the future? You know, things like Agenda 2030 and the United Nations protocols have to be like you said before, Oscar Isaac. That who's determining this timeline? Do you guys get um, into the conspiratorial realm of thinking with this stuff? Like, just kind of curious, like how far does conspiratorial ideas on this topic, the new world order is coming into fruition, right? What do you guys think about those kind of topics?
Yeah, I mean, it's not priority number one. I mean, at least for me to think about. I mean, look, if you're really committed to net zero, you can only be a sort of a certain kind of person, right? If you're really interested in
Sure.
realistically achieving that, if you're an energy company, which arguably are energy companies, oil and gas companies are among the list of agents most, if they actually change their behavior, are among the most actually able to bring around net zero. There's no rational basis for them to do so, though. They're probably
Sure.
not going to. So, in terms of those kind of broad scale, like, are we going to see full scale carbon emission reduction? No, no, we're not, because there's no actual economic or human incentive to do that. In terms of some of the transhumanist stuff, the anti-human stuff, I have certain opinions on like abortion on demand, widespread. That I think a certain teleology of what a human person is, can lead you to some really dark places. I think all of that runs up against reality, which reality is a real check, right? This is the thing about every election cycle. We have to have this whole thing about, here are these 18 awful things this presidential candidate wanted to do. Oh, what would ever happen if they will become reality? They won't. A bunch of them really won't, because they're not invented by people who have to contend with reality sometimes. They're invented by people who are told to make a list of things to do that voters and donors will react really well to, right? These are
Sure.
not the same thing. Because activist demands, by and large, activists oftentimes, this is unfortunately true across right and left. Activists often do not live in reality. They live in a world where everything's filtered through their one pet issue. This means that reality is a huge check on any ideas that you come up with, because you can be all net zero if you want to be in like the back room planning room to set out the Davos agenda or the WEF agenda, whatever you want to do. But when it comes to actually getting major geopolitical actors to curb their carbon emissions, that's a big check, because that's real. That's way harder to do than writing a blog post about why net zero is good.
Sure.
So I'm sure there are some conspiracy theories that are true. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not going to jump into that super far, but like,
Yeah. No.
I think reality functions as a check. And I think reality functions as a check a lot more than a lot of people give it credit for. Reality has saved the world from many very dumb, stupid, immoral ideas, and I think it
Couldn't
probably
agree
will
more.
continue to do so.
Yep. I think it's um God, what is that quote? That don't you don't need to cage the truth, let it loose because the truth
Yeah.
defends itself or whatever. It's like that kind of speaks to what you're saying there. Like reality is a check. Sooner or later, you're not going to be able to escape your ideological BS. And that what's that what's that other quote? I'm thinking of all these quotes right now. That the truth is what it is. You must bend to it or live a lie, basically. And
Yeah.
it's like you're not going to get away from the reality and the truth of a situation. It's only a matter of time. So I like that. I think you got a good point there. So
I think also like one of the interesting points about the conspiracy theories is not that we should give any heedance to the conspiracy theories. I mean, there might be sort of trends that or similar outcomes. That doesn't mean that the conspiracy theory is correct. I mean, a broken clock is right twice a day.
right.
Um, but there are some worrying trends in the world. Like I would point to places like Mexico, and then also the EU in the Paris Accords. And I mean the big issue for me is that the motives are completely wrong, right? So they want to stop poor countries from using the same materials that the now rich countries use to get rich, and now they're closing the door behind them, saying, "We're not going to let you get rich the way that we did because of the world or something." It's not very well defined from my perspective, but um, and I think that's the biggest rhetorical crime, I suppose. Let's say that that they want that they're doing it for helping everyone, but the thing looks like it's helping them because who are the people that are developing the renewable energy sources? Well, apart from China, it's the wealthy countries.
No,
Sure.
this is super true. I mean, I think we run into a lot in talks with ESG, talks about ESG with companies, is a lot of activists will talk about the rights of indigenous people. Like there are whole proposals on corporate ballots talking about
Sure.
the protecting the rights of indigenous people. Then you start pressing into that. Like, what is it? Does that include the right of indigenous people to, I don't know, monetize the natural resources on the land that they own?
Sure.
No, we can't do that because they're fossil fuels. Oh, okay. Well, those are actually really profitable and actually really help some of these historical wealth inequality. No, we can't do that. Sounds to me like you're only for certain rights of
sure.
indigenous people. And I'm like, I'm sorry, for someone who has been in centuries, if not millennia, of generational poverty, the right to feel slightly happier on Trans Visibility Day is significantly less than the ability to make a bunch of money from monetizing the natural resources that you own, that there is a market for. One of these things is way more fulfilling than the other. It doesn't mean the other one's like nothing, but yeah, no, this is true. But Oscar, you're exactly right on this, because it's the question of, well, what actually is meaningful. There are things that are
things that are meaningful from a human fulfillment
Sure.
standpoint of like, I feel better about my life. I feel less oppressed in my life. I have less burdens on my life. I'm all for that, man. Go crazy. I don't care. I really don't. Like, unless you're hurting someone or like doing things to kids, I don't can only be asked to care so much. But
Right.
there are things that predate that. There are things that are prerequisites for that. You have to have a degree of financial stability. You have to have a level of human flourishing above a certain below a certain level of human flourishing. Doesn't matter how inclusive your culture is. Everything sucks, and we need to have a realistic sense of priorities on that.
Yeah, I like that. I always think about that. Like, we're protecting the rights and we're supporting indigenous cultures. Well, who determines whether or not your practices are helping those indigenous cultures? What if those indigenous cultures don't want modernity? What if they
Yeah,
like being tribal hunter gatherers, or what if they like whatever their culture, like their culture and
yeah.
how they operate and how they organize themselves? What
Well,
if
what if
they
they want
like that? And
modernity?
yeah,
What if they do
you're
want
right.
modernity? And then you're
Well,
like, no, you can't
conversely,
have these
totally.
things. Yeah,
That's my point. Like again, it's this bureaucratic entity making all these determinations, and that's why I always think leaning more towards anti-authoritarian, libertarian, anarchist ideas is the check. And educating people about what these things really mean and how they really operate and function in societies. I think more people need exposure to that because I think, especially in the United States, for a very long time, the media is not interested in even introducing these type of ideas to their viewers and listeners. So
all right.
I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
I mean, part of it is like a budget issue, right? So um, like the amount of people who are libertarians in even America is vanishingly small. So there's no profit motive for these media companies to introduce these ideas. I mean, partially for like they have to they have to give a balance to the ideas, and but nobody considers. I mean, if you are going to include the sort of more minority viewpoints of libertarianism, when do you start including Trotskyism or
Aren't they already doing
socialism? Or
that? Aren't they already doing that in the universities?
well, I guess I was speaking more about media that are forced
Oh,
to
I see what you're saying. Yeah,
Mm,
give a balance of views. It's like, well, if you
yeah.
have to give every single view, there'll be no time for anything else. So they're
yeah.
giving the
Some might
most
say the
content.
Marxist perspective is wildly overrepresented. Yeah,
And I
That's
guess
kind of where I was going with that.
that's what their viewers want.
yeah. That's
Yeah,
no, that's
So
fair. That is the incentive.
yeah.
yeah. And I mean, I went to a liberal arts college. I went to San Diego State University. My BA is in sociology, and I always make this little joke, I guess, and I don't think it's probably not that funny, but I think it's funny. But I was assigned I always say I was assigned the Marx Engels reader, but I was never assigned Rothbard or
Yeah,
The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith. Like I wasn't assigned pro-capitalist literature. I had to absorb Marx and Engels for my sociology major. So, and that goes back to I don't know if you guys are familiar with the ideas of KGB, Yuri Bezmenov, ideological subversion. How he makes this claim. He made this claim years ago that the subverting the minds of American students has happened for 30, 40 years, and that's why. And he said you can point to the successes of it just by looking at the culture in the states now, and seeing how the education has created a lot of these ideological beings running around
Sure.
preaching all this stuff.
I mean, we can sit here and talk about it and complain about the long march through the institutions all we like, and I think it's definitely an issue in the UK and the US. But I think the greatest antidote to things like that is um, promoting self-reading, self-research, self-actualization. Go out and find these books for yourselves, but also create your own institutions. I mean, there are
Sure.
institutions like Young Voices that promote young writers, young talented writers who support the ideas of liberty, that go out there and put their ideas out there to an audience. And that's exactly what we should be doing. Is we
Sure.
should be creating these institutions that counterbalance um, the ideological dominance that the Marxists and the centre left people have had in our institutions, like in the civil service and in universities and in high schools and secondary schools, and they've had for the last however many decades.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great place to end it today too, guys. I think that's a great point. Is it goes back to what I was saying too about the education, the rationally explaining these ideas and concepts and topics. And I love that we have this medium of podcasting and the internet now, and we can talk to people with different perspectives all over the world. It's a beautiful thing, and I think it's the future of media, and that speaks exactly to your point. And I appreciate you guys coming on the show today and chatting with me about these topics. Before we get out of here, you guys, you want to let people know where they can reach out to you if you wanted people to be able to contact you and talk about stuff, see what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. I'm on Twitter. We used to call it Twitter. Now it's X because the free market demanded it, or Elon Musk wanted it, whatever you want to say. But I'm on X, Isaac Willour, ISAAC WILLOUR, and youngvoices.org, of course. Join YV.org. Sorry, we rebranded.
There you go. Isaac, thanks for being here. Oscar, where can people reach out and find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, and you can find me at Twitter, Gill_Lewis 65, GILL_LEWIS 65, and also WeSpeakFreely.org.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, you guys, for being on the show today. Thanks for such a great conversation. And feel free, reach out to me, come back if you ever want to be a guest and chat about stuff. Okay, guys?
My pleasure. Thanks for having us on.
Thanks, man.
Thanks so much, guys. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time.